Hello and welcome to the I've Seen Everything Reaction Wrap-Up podcast. Here is where I share my thoughts, reactions, and review for my latest reaction videos. To find these full reaction videos, please search for @SeenEverything over on YouTube, or check the description of this podcast for more information. Also, please remember to rate and comment on this episode, and follow the podcast so you can see when I'm putting out new wrap-ups. And now, on to my latest wrap-up for Midsommar. I feel like I was talking more in the second half than I was in the first half, but that was quite an experience. I honestly don't know if I've watched a horror movie like that before. I mean, I'm sure they've made horror movies about cults, which is obviously very much what that felt like, and likely, and not, I shouldn't say likely, it was a cult. I mean, people were killed and used as sacrifices here. Let us not forget. Josh, I'm sure they would rationalize because he did not adhere to the rules they told him about not photographing their scriptures. Mark, maybe just for peeing on the tree, I'm not sure, desecrating their tree. But the first two, what were their names? Connie, and I forget her fiance's name. But they didn't do anything, as far as I know, except that they were very disturbed by the first ritual we saw, where these two elders that were beyond the prescribed age voluntarily took their lives. That was obviously incredibly shocking and disturbing and not something anybody would ever expect to see. And they wanted to leave. He in particular was gravely affected by it. He was trying to plead with the man before he jumped, not to jump. So I don't think that they could really ascribe any kind of slight or any kind of, crime against their traditions or whatever that those two people committed. I just think it was inconvenient for them that they would leave and tell people what happened there. I mean, I didn't like Mark. He was a jerk. He was supposed to be a jerk. You got to have one of those characters in every one of these type of movies, it feels like, because, I mean, there are some people it feels like you're setting up not to be real sad when they go because you know people are going to die. But he didn't know about that. He didn't know that was their sacred tree. They know that they're outsiders. You can't exactly expect people to already know your ways and your traditions and your beliefs. The things that they did might be reasons to expel them from their community, but it seems like these are people that have grown pretty used to dealing with their own issues when it comes to things like that, from a long tradition of doing so, and having long traditions in other disturbing ways. They basically, I'm not saying that their relationship wasn't already fractured, Christian and Danny's, and that Christian was of the purest heart to begin with anyway, but they completely pushed him into that though too. They intoxicated him, drugged him, completely clouded his judgment, led him in there specifically to do that, were actively helping him do it at certain points. And then after that, basically sacrificed him in this final ceremony. All of which, I mean, against their traditions, I would think, because the other people were willing participants. These people were not willing participants. So you get into something at that point where you're just preying upon unsuspecting people and killing them, especially if you're inviting outsiders in specifically for that purpose. But it's a horror movie, and there's got to be something horrific in it. And so this one, I feel like it was just, the concept was, because there were lots of communities, villages, tribes of people, all kinds of things throughout history, obviously, that live out on their own for most or all of their existence. Don't ever really know anybody outside of their community, or maybe they know like people in very close local communities that all have similar faith traditions and things like that. And they have ways of dealing with all these things themselves. They have their own beliefs and their own, system of rules and laws, if you will, and all this kind of stuff. This is one of those preserved out in the middle of the wilderness in the modern age that has decided not to be a part of that age. Although I do go back to the one thing, because I thought this was a community that was completely without technology. And to be fair, I don't think we ever saw it. Like, they didn't prevent them from like using their computers and things like that. Obviously, they didn't have service out there. But she came up more toward the beginning and said the kids are watching Austin Powers. So obviously, they have access to watching movies somewhere. And they have access to some kinds of modern technology. So it's not necessarily completely keeping all that out. But also this thing that in the modern world, that the premise of this being like, traditions like you've seen throughout history, but that cross over into basically preying upon and murdering people, or basically preying upon and indoctrinating people. She didn't willingly, I mean, she did kind of by the end, but they had basically, again, coerced her to use her trauma to break down all of her defenses and brainwash her, basically, manipulate her, indoctrinate her into their way of thinking, their way of life, to try to find somebody that was in desperate need of something in their life, going through tragedy and trauma from that tragedy, and to provide that to her, provide that love that she was looking for. But even all the way up until the end, you could see something in her fighting back, something in her desperately trying to hold on to the last bits of her free will and the last consciousness she had that this isn't right. This should not be happening. And at the end, standing completely on her own as the rest of them were still writhing in sympathy with their people inside the fire who had sacrificed themselves. The moment they cut out on where she stops and she smiles, signaling that she's accepted it and that she's now fully part of this community. Horror movies can be a lot of things, and there can be a lot of things people find horrifying. And it is very interesting to play with those things in ways that you haven't necessarily seen before. It's usually a malicious force that's dark and scary and threatening, and basically outwardly trying to harm you from the beginning. And it's all this effort to try to stay away from it, or do you believe what's actually happening or whatever. This was very much the other direction of, at least with her, this open and accepting community and, like I said, love bombing and all this kind of stuff of like the brightest and most colorful ways, as opposed to darkness and scariness, of trying to find their way into making her do what they wanted. And there's something uniquely terrifying about that too, about where love and your need for it can be used against you. It's definitely a new experience. I haven't seen that one before, but very, very effectively done. And I very much enjoyed this. And I honestly don't know what else to say about it. So I feel like I've gone on for quite a while already. I won't hold you here any longer with it. Thank you for being here and watching this with me. This is week 3 of our Halloween horror reactions in the can and done. And I will see you on the next video. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the I've Seen Everything reaction wrap-up. Again, to find these full reaction videos, please search for @SeenEverything over on YouTube or check the description of this podcast for more information. Also, please remember to rate and comment on this episode and follow the podcast so you can see when I'm putting out new wrap-ups. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll meet you here for the next episode.